let's look into the Visual Studio solution structure of a Blazor application, and just show you what one can look like. This particular application does use the onion architecture method of managing dependencies, where the core library is .NET Standard, whereas .NET Standard has kind of been supplanted in .NET 6. It's just, oh, it's .NET 6. But that's kind of the same concept, .NET Standard, where it's more of a portable library. We're not going to compile to any particular version. Now, the diagram on the left of the Visual Studio screenshot, that is the direction of dependencies. You can see core is at the top. That means that transitively, every other one of these projects depends on and references core, but core doesn't reference any of them. That's the magic of onion architecture, is that most of your code, most of the application code is actually in the core library. And where we need other dependencies, like a web service, or we need Entity Framework to talk to a database, or we need some type of message to be sent over Azure Service Bus or SignalR, well, those libraries are referenced in other projects, and we use an interface, we use an abstraction, and put that in core, and then implement the interface in the other project, and then make use of Entity Framework or whatever the library is. And so you can see that data access is one of the projects that references core. Well, there's a lot of code that makes use of Entity Framework in the data access project, but it implements abstractions that are defined in core. And of course, all of the entities, the main objects that are eventually persisted to a database, those live in core. So this is what a Blazor Visual Studio solution can look like. And you know what? In this particular application, it's modeled off of a car auction application. There are two Blazor applications. One is UI project, and then UI.admin. I gave that example. And again, it tends to be pretty common and very useful to have one application for most of the users. And instead of trying to have one section of that application be security restricted to only a couple of users, the admins, we just have another application that has those functions, and you can't even log into that other application unless you're an admin. It's a very common pattern. But notice also in here, we have 3 levels of automated tests. We have a unit test project, we have an integration test project, and an acceptance test project. And I'll show you some example code later, but unit tests, if a lot of you probably do test-driven development, unit tests are C# tests that do not call out of process. Everything they do is in the same memory space. They don't call out of process. Integration tests at this level are component level integration tests. They take one key dependency and do a round trip and make sure that that works. For example, data access with Entity Framework and SQL Server. That is one chain that you absolutely have to have integration tests around to make sure that you can create an object, persist it over to SQL Server, and then read do select query and come back and make sure your Entity Framework mappings are working in all your queries and those kinds of things. And so that's an example of a type of integration test. And then acceptance tests, those are your full system tests that do complete scenarios. And so those tend to be executed on a fully deployed environment. And if you're implementing continuous integration, then you have an automatically deployed environment that's available to run tests against that completely deployed version of this application. And if you don't have an automated deployment immediately after your integration build, give us a call. We can help you implement that last critical step so that your team is using continuous integration. Because continuous integration has 3 key steps. You have the private build that runs on a local developer workstation. You have the integration build that runs on a team shared build server. And then you have your first deployment and test suite that runs on a fully deployed environment. So don't miss those 3 steps of continuous integration. Otherwise, you're not getting the value that pattern provides.